Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar of DE&I Awareness Week, the Taming of the Toxic Workplace Culture. My name is James Swart, and I'm the Director of Education and Leadership Development for the National Apartment Association. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few housekeeping points. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted on the NAA website and the YouTube channel later this week. We've allotted a little bit of time at the end of today's session for questions and answers. Feel free to submit those using the Q&A panel or the chat box at the bottom of your screen anytime during today's session. I also want to take a moment to thank the Home Depot Pro for their sponsorship of this year's DE&I Awareness Week. We are thankful for their partnership with NAA. And with that, I'm excited to welcome our speakers for today's session. So Dana, over to you.
Hello, thank you so much, James. And thank you all for joining us. I will be your moderator and panelist for today. And I am joined by two of my esteemed industry peers that I have the pleasure of introducing to you all. But first, I will start with myself. I'm Dana Duckworth, founder of Speak Up Dana, AKA the Big Speaker and your favorite supplier partner. I'm a public speaker, facilitator, DEI consultant, and host of the Hilariously Unemployed podcast. My multifamily experience spans 13 years, and I was most recently awarded 2023 NAA DEI Champion of the Year. I truly believe the key to creating inclusive spaces is through transparency and hope that we can create one of those spaces here for you today. Enough about me. I'd like to introduce you to Charlotte Flores. She is the CPO, Chief People Officer for BH Management, and has more than 15 years of human resources experience focused on human resources strategy and change management within the multifamily, construction, and engineering industries. She is SHRM certified professional. She is a SHRM certified professional, has a diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace certificate from the University of South Florida, and more. Charlotte holds a BS in Business and Human Resources Management from the University of Phoenix and a master's in Employment Law from Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. So excited to have you here with us today, Charlotte. And last but certainly not least, thank you so much. Certainly not least, rounding out our panel is Cameron Shelton. He is the Senior Regional Director of Operations at CenterSpace and has 25 years of leadership in financials, insurance, and real estate. He sits on numerous subcommittees at NAA, such as his third year serving on the DEI committee. He's dedicated. Second term on NAA's Education Advisory Board for Apartmentalized, and an inaugural graduate of the NAA Diversity Leadership Program. Cameron continues the work as Twin Cities Diversity Inclusion Council member and CenterSpace's DEI Steering Committee co-chair. He has received education from the University of Notre Dame, Mendoza School of Business, and served on the National Board of Governors for the Human Rights Campaign of Washington, D.C., and an LGBTQIA+ advisor to the U.S. Congress and states of California. Panelists, say hello to the audience.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, so the reason you're all here today, we're going to be talking about combating toxic company culture, and this goes beyond getting rid of the cool table in your cafeteria. Negative cultural elements are inherent in the structure of some workplaces and policies and practices that sustain and reward exclusion. This toxicity is detrimental to the team morale and can cost you and your team emotionally and financially. So we're here to talk about it today, help you diagnose some of those toxic workplace cultures, and talk about strategies to eliminate those. So we'll define and recognize toxic culture and its contributing factors. We'll uncover inclusive strategies, and we'll learn to apply intersectional insights. Next slide, please, James. Okay, so to kick us off, Charlotte, could you please define what toxic workplace culture is for us?
So I think when we hear toxic workplace culture, I think everybody has some pretty, overt examples: poor leadership, poor communication from leadership. You've got things that when you get into cliques and gossip and all of these things that seem very obvious and overt that these are terrible for culture and create a negative environment. Ultimately, toxic workplace culture, you end up with an environment that basically disappoints more than it enriches its people. And so I do think, again, A lot of times what comes to mind when you hear that are just very in-your-face kind of examples of what creates that toxic culture. But when you get into things, especially in the context of the last few years where so many organizations are focused on DE&I specific and trying to change their culture to be more inclusive, you get into the cliques and the exclusions and practices, things that seem innocent and seem, ways to get people together that actually unintentionally end up excluding. And so I think that's what we are going to get more into in today's session.
Thank you so much for that definition, Charlotte. I think that when people hear that word toxic, even when they were thinking about joining this session, they thought that we'd be talking about the most egregious of offenses, but we know what those offenses are. Like, we know what racism in the workplace is. We're talking about the things that unintentionally are a part of your business practices, are a part of your employee handbook, are a part of the culture of your company that you don't realize are creating exclusion for everyone inside of the organization. Cam, did you want to add anything to that definition of toxic workplace culture to round it out for us?
Yeah, I mean, really, we think about the basics that you talked about, but it could be something that's very hidden. It could be a bias that you don't realize that you have or that many people share. In today's session, we're going to talk about that and bring that to light. So you start thinking and pausing when you're starting to hear about the word resistance, or you see resistance in people. Today, this will help you kind of navigate those situations and make you aware. It's about self-awareness, right? And how do we make us better? By being aware and learning.
Thank you for bringing up unconscious bias for the first time this DEI week. And that is a term that you all will probably hear as a theme throughout the week. So we know when our biases are left unchecked, they can start to present themselves in the way that we work, the way that we communicate, the way we write our policies. So if we don't know what our biases are, we may be unintentionally creating exclusive practices in our organization. So first things first, you should probably check your unconscious biases and figure out exactly what those things are to then begin to work against them and create a more positive ecosystem inside your organization. Next slide, please, James. So, are you one of those people that says the company of my culture isn't toxic? Well, maybe it's not toxic in some of those bigger ways that we described on the last slide, like the overt racism or gender inequality or pay inequality. Maybe there are just some exclusionary practices that you don't really think of being so exclusive. One of those, your favorites, your golf outings. Now, I know a lot of the membership of NAA absolutely loves golf. I'm not one of those folks, but I can see why a lot of people truly enjoy it. But have you ever thought about the fact that this is a very exclusive outing? I know we love to have our annual golf tournaments. We love to have a golf outing in our own organizations or within our membership. But are these practices in place that are creating exclusion? Well, let's think about it and let's break it down a little bit. Golf historically has had a lack of diversity. In our history, there have been certain people that haven't been allowed into golf courses. So that means there's been limited access for several people for several decades. And some of these people work within our organizations. So they may not have had access to learn how to play golf, but this is an annual outing or something that you do so frequently in your organization, and they feel excluded from that. Also, the cost of participation for golf is very, very expensive. This is, again, something that requires access. So we're not just talking about lack of diversity when it comes to race, we're also talking about gender and socioeconomic status. Who could afford to learn how to play golf before they join your organization? I couldn't, for one. There's also complex rules and etiquette. Everybody doesn't know those nuances. And then there are the physical barriers that we often do not think about when we have outings, specifically surrounded around sports. There could be people that just cannot physically play a round of golf, but they want to be able to engage with you and those who are in your organization. And then, of course, there's the innate elitism. Some people they've just had access to this all of their lives, and golf is really a privilege that not all of us have had. Cam, give us your thoughts on this and share some practices that seem to be positive, but are not always so.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking about your golf example, there might be underlying disabilities, right? Like that could keep you, exclude you from playing golf, but then there's this pressure to be a part of it, and it could be really for that person that has a disability that might not want to disclose that, that could cause a problem, right? And that kind of leads into what I'm going to talk about here. Sometimes even with a positive intent, we do not realize what can cause a potentially toxic or unhealthy work environment. For example, wellness programs. There's a ton of positive intent here, but sometimes that's not always what comes across. And I could think of times when I was asked to be part of a STEPS program, and I I was excited about it, but there was some resistance in me because I know that I have a physical disability, and it could be due to some of these disabilities that people have that might not just people might not just be open about that. There have been times when people ask me to take the stairs, and I'm like, well, can I use the elevator? And they're like, come on, you could come up the stairs with me. Come on, Cam, what's your issues? And we have to get our steps in. We need to exercise. And it's not that I don't want to exercise, because I do. I used to be a marathon runner. I used to run a ton until I got into my early 30s, and I actually developed two disabilities within 2 years of each other that were really significant situations that when I was in the prime health of myself. And you know so then you have to ask yourself, am I forced to out my disabilities to my peers? Should I have to do that? Just so they understand? This can create a really uncomfortable environment, right? And either I have to be comfortable with that, which I am. I'm talking about it right now, but some people might not be. There might be something that's going on that they don't want to disclose. They do not want to be open about. And now you've created an environment where, they're having to disclose something. Really, it's protected, right? There's legal protections there, but you've created an environment for them where they don't feel like they belong. My example is I have a heart condition. I've had heart surgery for it, and I've been unconscious for this. I've been in intensive care for it, so it's very scary for me. And sometimes it prevents me from doing physical activities like climbing stairs, it puts me in a really bad arrhithmia, and it could put my life in danger. And so sometimes I can go upstairs, but there's times I recognize I'm having a bad day, I'm having an off day, and I can't do that. And then we're all walking properties, doing what we do in multifamily. And next thing you know, they're like, let's take the stairs, y'all. And I'm like, I need to take the elevator. But then there's teasing that happens. There's like, why not? And then if at that moment, if people just realized that there was some resistance in me, right? Like, he's being resistant. Why doesn't he? What something else is going on here? But that doesn't happen, right? That realization doesn't happen. So then now I'm starting to feel like I don't belong. People are starting to make fun of me because I can't contribute. And maybe there's a goal that I'm on a team, because this happens, right? Steps. We're all on this. We're joining the steps group, and we're a part of this group. We want to get so many steps in, and it's part of our wellness mission and our organization's mission, to make better every day is one of our slogans. But but they don't realize now it's making me feel like I don't belong, like I'm not able to contribute. So subsequently, it could create a toxic work environment, and it's a bias, right? It's a bias of me. And it could be really dangerous, in the sense of my mental stability, my mental well-being, because I'm already having struggles, with dealing with the last decade of having these disabilities, and not and it's tough. But now I can't belong to something that's really good, that's part of my organization. And these are things that we don't stop and think about on the everyday.
Wow, Cam, thank you for your vulnerability and your transparency there. You're getting a lot of love in the chat for sharing that. And honestly, it is things that people just do not think about. And the fact that you said the teasing, like when we think about a workplace, we think about a corporate environment. We don't think that there's corporate teasing or bullying or things that happen, but they actually do. So if Cam was not willing to be transparent with what was going on with him, nobody knows, and everybody can have their thoughts, opinions, and they'll say little things, but what impact is that having on Cam? You also talked about the team aspect. So in your wellness program, you're a team, and we know we all want to be team players. We want to be the one that brings it home for our team. Imagine the pressure that someone is feeling to go above and beyond for your team, and they may have a physical barrier that won't allow them. So now they feel like they've let the team down. And of course, the morale of themselves and maybe even the team, because they didn't succeed or didn't win the accolade, it's all going to start weighing on that person's shoulders. And when we talk about wellness programs, yes, some people want to do steps, but have we considered meditating as a form of wellness? Have we considered reading as a form of wellness, stretching? There's so many other things that are outside of workouts that encompass our wellness. For me, my mental health is very, very well when I go outside and allow the sun to shine on my face and take deep breaths. For others, it may be going to the gym or going for a run. So we need to start to create practices that are more inclusive. Charlotte, I saw you nodding your head there where Cam was talking. I know you were feeling him the same way in which I was. I'd be remiss if I did not toss to you for you to share here.
But do you think that, right, so there's some of that where a lot of team members think that they're helping, they're encouraging, like it's, yeah, like, no, come on, you can do it, without, but then again, right, not thinking about the position it puts that person in to maybe have to disclose something that they don't want to share. But also this getting labeled as not being a team player when you choose not to participate in those things that are tied to kind of, quote unquote, traditional wellness programs, and then feeling like, oh, well, Cam's just not part of it, like he doesn't want to do it. So the next thing that comes up, we're just not even going to ask because, and that's not fair either. It's one of the reasons that we've stayed away from some of those traditional offerings and focused more on overall well-being. And so whether that's, you have self-care days that you can take, and if that self-care means meditating, if that means taking a walk, if that means taking a nap, whatever that means to you, then those things are important. It doesn't have to be necessarily physical wellness so much as, to your point, Dana, it's your mental health, it's your overall well-being. How are you feeling? And then how can we help support those things?
Just that change in verbiage from we have a wellness program or we're doing something with steps to self-care, self-preservation, resilience, whatever it is that you need to take care of yourself today, that's what you should do. And that's how you can contribute to yourself and also contribute to the workplace, because when you feel good, of course, you produce better and you're a better employee and you're a better teammate and you feel better. Thank you all for sharing there. Next slide, please, James. Now, Cam, I'd like to go ahead and toss it back over to you for a little bit of talk about tokenism. I know we tapped into disability awareness, but also would like you to share some insights on weight bias as well.
Awesome. Well, do we know what tokenism is? It's the practice of doing something such as hiring a person that belongs to a minority group to only prevent criticism of and give the appearance that we're hiring fairly, and you don't want a company to do this, just do this because that's the thing to do, but that's what companies tend to do. And when I think about tokenism, it's really subtle. In my organization, when I first joined, it was a subtle thing that I felt was going on because we started focusing, it wasn't verbal, the DEI piece of it, right? But there was things that the company was focusing on and changing its brand, changing its mission, which were awesome, super fantastic. And one of those things is women in leadership. Did a remarkable job of hiring women in leadership. So good. Like our CEO is a woman. It was I think she was like the very first in the industry in a REIT. So that was great. And then, almost all our senior vice presidents are women. People in the regional level are women. So in the senior leadership roles, our board. So it's like, wow, this is super cool. But when we talk a little bit further in the program, I'm going to go deeper into this and what the impact can be, on someone coming into an organization and how people might view that as really great. We got an award for it nationally, but is it really great? Is it awesome for everyone? Sometimes you could swing the pendulum too far to one side, and next thing you know, all that space that pendulum went by is now leaving all these other people behind. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. When I think about, disability awareness, we talked about that with my heart condition, but what people need to realize is that most disabilities are not visible, right? They're not. Whether they're mental, physical, they're not visible. And that, we shouldn't be going around going, what disability do you have? What does this person have? Oh my God, we don't do that. However, what we need to realize is we need to be aware. We need to have self-awareness when we're looking and talking to someone, and you are visibly visualizing what they're giving you, right? Like you can see what they're giving you back. Your optics are telling you something. Listen to it. If you are like the steps situation, if you are seeing resistance from someone, there might be something there. That should be your stop sign. When we take harassment training, they talk about the red, the yellow, the green, right? Like if you've taken harassment training and places you go, this is a green zone, this is a yellow zone, I better stay away from it, and this is a no zone. Really, honestly, the moment you start sensing that resistance, that's probably a yellow zone, right? Like it's probably where you need to start maybe going, okay, I need to take a different path, because there are so many disabilities out there that are not visible. And I'm a person that has 2 major disabilities. And sometimes I have really good days, but then there's sometimes I have I struggle. And sometimes you visibly can see it, and I'll give you a prime example. I have a bone and spinal disease in my spine that I developed at the same time of my heart condition. It was really hard for me mentally. Those were some dark times for me from a mental perspective, because I went from being in the greatest health of my life to not so great. And I thought I was doing everything right, went to the gym 5 days a week, ran on the treadmill, I used to blow people away at the 24-hour fitness I went to in Dallas. They would go, how is he running for an hour at 8 miles an hour? This guy's crazy, and that running released stress from me, and to have those things that you used to use as a release get taken away from you, it was hard. So from a mental perspective, that's just, that really took me down a really dark path. And so then, I have these other disabilities that I formed. And I remember I was running one day and I started feeling this pain in my back, and it got really bad to where I couldn't even move. And I ended up going to the hospital, and I got an MRI, and first they did an X-ray, and they go, oh my God, you have scoliosis? And I'm like, no, isn't that something you're born with? And they're like, you have a curvature of your spine, and you have several herniated discs and a fractured vertebrae. And that's why I was in so much pain. And like where I couldn't breathe. And I was like at the pinnacle of my health. And so it's something I've struggled with. It's something I go to therapy for. There's stuff I do. I'm supposed to have some pretty major surgeries. I've had several things done and through the years to help me walk, but I'm always in pain. And so when I'm walking on the property, I have to make it known, which I really shouldn't have to, because people know. But one of the things is for curb appeal, I have to make sure that I'm leading by example, right? So picking up the trash as I see it, so my managers see that, so their team members see that, and sometimes I can't bend over to do that. Like I can't. It's just so painful. So I have to be clever and do other things. And one time I'll never forget this. There's this manager that kept me from feeling excluded, like I wasn't representing, right? Wasn't representing as a leader. And they had a grab stick, and they go, Cam, So and I got you one too with your name on it, you know, and we were going around with a grab stick, picking up trash, and that really talk about inclusion, talk about
Mhm.
that just made me feel so much better. So, you know, it really helped me get past that dark day, you know, where I couldn't feel like I was contributing. You know, and then when we talk about weight bias, you know, I'm a heavy set guy now. But if you now just heard my story,
Mhm.
in my family, if you don't exercise at all, like I could eat, you know, a piece of fruit and I gain 10 pounds. Okay. So yeah, I could eat better.
Mm.
However, sometimes people, their thyroid, sometimes people's health, sometimes people, the way they just are chemically made up or biologically made up, you will gain weight, right? I don't want to be a heavy man, but just remember that I am somebody. I am a human being. And
Mhm.
that, you know, you cannot judge a book by its cover because I could tell you how many times I show pictures of me 10 years ago. And when I was in my prime health, they're like, they look like two different people. And people go, oh my God, you like, I couldn't have ever done that, you know? But see, even then, that's like kind of like having a bias, right? Like he
Yeah.
couldn't have ever done that. He couldn't have ever been a runner.
Mhm.
Yeah, I used to run. I was really good at it, you know? And and so I just want people to be self-aware of those things. You know, don't judge a book by its cover. Check your biases, learn from them because you know, you never know what someone's been through or going through. And that's what's really important. And those things can easily contribute to a very toxic work environment. And there's easy remedies for them.
Cam, you touched on so many things there. When you brought up the grab stick, that's what we mean by equity. So not everybody needs the same thing, but just the fact that someone saw, hey, this would really benefit Cam. We can make it available to everyone, but we're going to make it available to Cam because we know it's equitable and it'll make things easier for him. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And that is an easy example of how we can create inclusion. It's really just being human first, people first. And when we think about or talk about weight bias, it goes both ways. So if you have someone on your team who's very slim, don't ask them why they're not eating. It could be a number of reasons. Don't tell them they need a sandwich. They may have a gluten intolerance. Like you really have to be mindful of the fact that you should never be commenting on anyone's physical within the workplace. That's absolutely not what we're there to do. So I want to talk a little bit about introversion. So yes, I am Speak Up Dana, the big speaker, but if you know anything about my story, I'm a former introvert. I am reformed and now I'm very extroverted, but for a long time in my life, my anxiety caused me to be very, very introverted. And like Cam said, not all disabilities are visible. I have ADHD, anxiety, and I've dealt with depression before. And a part of my introversion did not allow me to come into the room and talk to everybody. It didn't allow me to be so vocal or to self-promote in the way that I do now. So it really impacted myself in the way that I was able to network. Some things that you can think about if you have introverts in your organization and you notice maybe they don't want to go out and hang out at the company events, think about things that you're doing unintentionally in your organization. So if your office layout is just completely open, when I was an introvert, I needed my private time. And especially now as a person with ADHD, when I'm on, I'm on. But when I'm off, I'm really off. And I have a minimal amount of characters like a tweet, maybe 140 on a good day. And I don't have the capacity to talk and be so joyful, but I want to get some time in to focus on my work. So I maybe need a quiet space. Is there a quiet space like that inside of your office or your organization? And then don't get me started on cameras on during the Zoom calls. Like I know we're in this hybrid work environment and we all want to see each other because that's the way we feel connected. But imagine being an introvert and the first thing Monday morning, you have to cut on your camera and your hands are shaking and they're sweating because maybe you have to present on this call. And you're so focused about what it is that you look like that you're not even doing your best presentation. Imagine if you let that person keep their camera off, how much they could shine without having that extra barrier that they had to go over in order to present to you. So just keep in mind that not all of us are extroverts. Some of us do require some things different, and we can be more equitable in spaces by just thinking about what others may need. And then microaggressions and stereotypes. Now, this is pretty egregious, but some people, again, have those unconscious biases that are unchecked. And when they do, employees might be preoccupied with navigating those microaggressions. So someone is always saying something that seems offensive to me when I'm in the workplace. Then every time I come into the workplace, I have that angst that, oh, I don't know what Deborah's going to say today, but I'm going to have to do some mental gymnastics to get over that so that I can do my work. I'll have less mental energy to focus on my actual job. And of course, that's going to lead to decreased productivity, decreased morale for myself. And maybe it's a place that I don't want to stay. You have to think about everything that you do in your organization as a retention method. If every day I come to work, I feel microaggressions and stereotype, there's going to be a day where I'm not coming to work. And then constantly hearing these microaggressions or stereotypes can lead to decreased job satisfaction, motivation, and really can start to create a very toxic workplace culture. Some examples of this is when a female engineer is regularly assumed to be reporting to a role rather than to be the technical one, or when you have an older team member who's assumed to not really have any technical savvy. These are things that we do or say unintentionally that can really impact somebody's ability to thrive in your organization. And Charlotte, I'd be remiss if I didn't throw it to you to talk about something that's really important. Like this is probably our top tier toxic behavior. So please take over for executive.
Yeah. And I know for this, especially for, if you're in this property management industry, that, the drinking topic and the happy hours and the cocktail hours and all of the things that seem to center around alcohol. Nothing wrong with them, but it's one of those ways that you can unintentionally exclude. And when you have these happy hours or you have these events where the alcohol seems to be the focus, so you're advertising open bar or things like that, and there are people that do want to participate for the social aspect that, I know it's shocking, just don't drink. They don't like it, they don't want to. And then you've got people that have very personal reasons for why they don't drink or don't want to. And it's not uncommon to, when you're at these functions and somebody doesn't have a drink in their hand, people will ask why they're not drinking or try to get them a drink because they don't have one. Or, oh, I see you finished that one, let me go get you another one. And it's all of those things that, putting people in awkward positions to either have to disclose why they're not drinking or making them feel a little on the outs because they want the social, but not necessarily the alcohol. And that's something that again, it's unintentional, that I've even found myself doing that. And it's been, having to learn to be very careful about, because, hey, can I get you anything? And then somebody that didn't have a drink in their hand, I'm like, oh, why? And then as it's coming out of my mouth and they're telling me why they don't drink, in the back of my head, I'm thinking that was the worst thing that that had to have been very awkward and uncomfortable for them. And I appreciated them sharing, but I should have never put anybody in a position to feel like they needed to. It should have just been, no, I'm good. Great. Let me know if you need anything, that kind of thing. And I think that just small things, making it about the social, call it a social hour instead of a happy hour. It doesn't have to be in the evening. Do a brunch, do coffee, have other things available other than just the alcohol if you want to get together in the office and hang out, snacks, sodas, whatever that may be. But the focus is away from the alcohol, because that's a really, really big hot topic in a lot of our feedback that we get about how we create employee events, especially right now where a lot of people are remote or hybrid. Everybody wants to get together and have drinks, but not everybody.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Charlotte. You were getting lots of love in the chat. Like, some people just are not drinkers, and that is okay. And some people have reasons why they are not drinkers, and that is also okay. I will share that I have always been, I'm cool with the cocktails, okay? They are fine by me. However, I had a peer who I work with, and this is the first time that I realized it was such an issue, who shared with me that they had trouble with alcoholism. And I was so, of course, thankful that they shared that with me. But once I got that knowledge, I started thinking about everything that we were doing that was making it harder for this person to just go through the day and survive. Like, yes, everything is titled a happy hour. Yes, when we do our employee event, it might be at a winery or a brewery. Yes, we are to celebrate. We're going to send you some mini bottles of alcohol or your favorite champagne. Just things that we don't think about that maybe limit people's capacity to really thrive inside of an organization. So once I got that realization, I was like, yes, this really is a problem. And even myself, like there are some times where I want to have the drinks, and then there are other times where I don't want to have the drinks. And if people are used to you having that margarita and you don't, they're like, oh, what's going on? What's wrong with you? And please don't ever ask me if I'm pregnant, because that is just too much information. But these are the types of things that happen in excessive drinking cultures. Like these are the norms that have made people feel like it's okay to ask this woman about her health status because she doesn't have a drink in her hand. And it should not be someone's responsibility to explain to you why they'd rather have a ginger ale than a Jack and Coke. Can we bring back the days of the ice cream float? That's cool too. Let's go ice cream socials. I mean, breakfast is a vibe. Can we do brunches? Like, I'm here for a good brunch without the champagne or with it, but make sure you have options for everyone. And we're not telling you not to have your golf outings and not to have your happy hours. We're just saying to be inclusive and make sure that there's space for everyone within your organization. Diversify, create different things. You can get very creative. Like, I've never been to a multifamily brunch. Somebody make that happen. I'm happy to host it. But these are things that you could be doing to really make people feel included in your organization. Next slide, please. All right, so let's get into some more story time. So Cam talked a little bit about tokenism, and I've experienced being one of one in an organization, one Black woman amongst many who were not Black. They were all white, and that's okay until the practices are maybe not so inclusive of that person. Maybe the person that the organization wooed to come in, maybe now they don't really have those things that'll make a person like me stay. Or maybe I just start feeling othered. Maybe I can't be myself. Maybe I'm covering every time because I don't relate to my coworkers in the same way. Or maybe it's always a golf outing and me, I've never even played golf. These are things that make you start to feel like, is this environment for me? Is this an inclusive environment? Would I want somebody else to come into this organization knowing the experiences that I had? And I think if we start to ask that question of ourselves, we'll start to see some of those practices. Well, that day I didn't feel really great about that. Would I want somebody to have come in that day when that thing was going on? No, I wouldn't. Charlotte, can you share some of your HR stories with us about the experience of being in some of these environments?
Yeah, and from an HR perspective, everything that we've mentioned has surfaced in some way, shape, or form in the HR context, right? We've had employees that come to us that feel pressure from their leaders to participate in the happy hours, or to stay after, if they're traveling, to stay at the bar and have a drink after, and they're not comfortable, but feel like if they tell their leader that they're going to be perceived as not a team player, or that they have to go along with it to stay in the leader's good graces, which is never okay. Both from the leader shouldn't be pressuring, and we shouldn't be putting our people in that position. We've had situations where we've had people who are more introverted and want to interact, but they only want to interact throughout the course of the workday for all of the reasons. And so they don't participate in some of the outside of the workday events or outside of work events. And it's not because they don't like or appreciate their team members. It's just simply they're not comfortable in these bigger social settings, and they prefer to be at home or prefer to spend that time with their families because they work with them, for so many hours a day anyway. And so these are the kind of things that surface the HR from a, how do I navigate this? What can I do? But also it does tank your engagement. I mean, this is where you think you have a culture of this, but you've got pockets where that culture is actually very toxic or very different. And so those are just things to consider, because there are several HR situations that arise from all of the things that we've talked about.
Absolutely. Cam, let's get back to you and talk more about that pendulum and how it's
for sure. I mean, you talk about engagement, right? This really ties into, at my organization when I first got there, and we talked about, we have a lot of women in leadership, which I am a champion of. And one of my biases is I love working with women and for women. Okay. So that is like my happy place. But, when I look at reflection, do I see myself here within this organization? I started after time, my first 6 months, my first 8 months, I started realizing I'm not seeing myself here within my organization, right? I was looking around me going, am I the only Hispanic man here? Am I the only gay man here? I'm the only male. It's all white women. And like, where do I fit in? And it's rad because I have the most brilliant women and minds in the industry that work for our organization, but I just started not seeing myself. And then things started happening, right? We started dipping our toes in the diversity, equity, and inclusion. We started having the courage to put ourselves out there. And one of the things I'll never forget was a panel was put together, and it was about how do we celebrate Pride Month and how do we bring it to our communities? And no one ever asked me from that leadership team to be a part of that with my background. No one even, thought of Cam's name. And that really started to change my engagement for a minute, like, oh, and I remember getting that engagement survey and just going, I'm not feeling this, right? Because I'll never forget that we put it out there, we'll admit it, we own it. They put the pride colors out there and the pride colors were not even right. They were like all over the place, they weren't inclusive. And I was like, oh my God, who agreed to that? Who allowed that? I mean, it's great that we're trying to do it, but it's going to have bad reactions to it as well, right? But through that, it was like, okay, Cam, what can I do here to make my voice heard? And one of the things that I can tell you that I did was I spoke up. And I really, that's where you're going to find out what kind of workplace or what kind of company you work for, right? What is the culture? You're really going to start to understand if you have that access. I have that access, right? I have, it might be a little harder if you don't have that access and you have to navigate how to get there, right? But I have that access. So I spoke up. And one of the things I did one late evening with my chief people officer was I said, we were working late. And I was like, you know what, Julie, I just don't see myself here. What do you mean, Cam? And then it just started a dialogue. And then we had this great conversation. And you know what? Then the inclusion and the equity started coming back because then my boss heard this. And then, it was just, I spoke up. But it's easy. We're trying to do the right things here, right? We want to hire diverse candidates. We don't want it to be this company to be led just by men. We want to show the world, but you can easily carve out a bunch of people in that process that maybe you were including before. And then all of a sudden you're not, because the other thing that happened while I was there were some men in leadership in senior roles when I was there. And then several of them either at that point got laid off or they left the organization, and then we only replaced it with women. So then I'm thinking to myself, oh, do I have opportunity anymore? And I know I do, right? But it's just, do I? You start doubting yourself. And so I think that if you're creating programs and you're thinking about doing these hiring practices when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, be mindful of the gaps. Be mindful of what that can create, because it can really, you could have great engagement scores, but all of a sudden you did all these things, right?
Yeah.
And then all these other people through the process got excluded. So make sure you're bringing everyone along in the process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Cam. And I want to encourage you all to go ahead and start to drop questions into the chat or send them to myself privately if you have them for us. Next slide, please, James. All right, Charlotte, can you talk to us about like some of the real impacts, the things that the people who write the checks really care about when it comes to the impacts of toxic workplace culture in a company?
Yeah, so I mentioned before that a lot of the things that we've talked about that come up that surface from an HR perspective, it does tank your employee engagement, especially, you know, the last several years where we hear more about burnout and people quitting, those kinds of things. So when you've got a workplace where people, where these things are going on and you're not trying to kind of unlearn and reframe and kind of think through these things more intentionally, you end up with a workforce that policies and procedures are designed around the company and not necessarily the workforce or the people in mind. And those kinds of things lead to, you have your higher turnover, you have people that are afraid to speak up. Cam, I think your example was great where you felt comfortable enough to actually say that. And there's a lot of companies where that's not the case for lots of reasons, but that toxic workplace culture, that environment, they don't want to speak up, or they feel like they speak up, but nothing changes. And so this is where, if you've got virtual suggestion box, or you do the employee engagement surveys, when you're sharing that, share the good and the bad, and actually look at how you can change some of maybe the not so great feedback that you're getting, so that it doesn't lead to the, well, I say something, but it's never going to change, or this is just how it's going to be here, so that you don't run into that at the bottom line of things where it's costing you money because you're losing people, when it's really just as simple, let's look at some of the ways we can change or reframe what already exists.
Thank you so much for that, Charlotte. Like, we have to start to think about people and the impacts that really our workplaces can have on the individual, on the person. And like Charlotte said, not everybody is Cam, not everybody is comfortable speaking up, not everybody is me, not everybody is going to vocalize what it is they're feeling, but they will leave your organization, or they will score your engagement survey low, or they will tell another person, hey, that's not the organization for you because this is the way that I felt when I was there. Next slide, please. So we can't leave you with all of this information without telling you how to make it better and how you can start to create inclusive events and some of the best practices for just making the overall culture more inclusive. Please consider physical accessibility when you are doing anything in your organization, whether that is the floor plan of your office and how you're going to lay it out, or again, those outings and those events. What venue are you choosing? Is it very easy for everyone to find it and navigate there? Everybody should be able to move around the venue in a self-determined manner. They shouldn't need anything additional if you're focusing on this. Also, think about linguistics. How are you communicating to people? Are there multiple forms of communication? Is it written? Is it verbal communication? Are you having meetings about these things? How are you reaching out? Consider multilingual text if you have people who speak multiple languages within your organization. And make sure you're using inclusive language. You never want to focus too male-dominated on your language, or, like Cam said, don't swing that pendulum too far and leave the males out. Also, consider diverse people in planning your events. Do you have the same committee plan everything? Well, chances are they keep planning that golf outing that I told y'all was a little bit exclusive. So you'll want to make sure that you're asking for additional voices and additional stakeholders when you're thinking about planning your event. And then consider the time of day. Like Charlotte said, not everybody wants to hang out after work. Some people want to get home. Some people are caretakers for parents or children or pets. And some people are just tapped out after that 5 o'clock hits the clock. They just want to go home. So is it okay for us to have this event in the morning or mid the workday? And then audit attendance, and please request feedback. The only way to really know how things are going is to ask. Like, ask your team, did you enjoy this? What are your recommendations for our next event? How can we do things better? Charlotte, did you have anything to add here for best practices?
One of the really kind of fundamental or quick, I say quick, but quick things to check is looking at what are your company's core values? Do you have a set of core values that's tied to your brand? And then looking at your policies and your procedures, do those align with the core values? Because a lot of times it's a check the box, but our policies don't read anything like who we say we are as a company. And that's just a very kind of fundamental place to start with. Are we really walking the talk with who we say we are or who we say we're not? checking when you're posting for new jobs, that inclusive language, like Dana mentioned, is really important, because a lot of times we're unintentionally excluding individuals from applying for these jobs, and it starts with from the very first experience they have with your organization, and you don't even realize. So those are just some of the kind of baseline, let's look at these things and see where we're at.
Thank you so much for that, Charlotte. Focus on those core values and make sure that your organization lives up to them. Next slide, please. I do want to jump to a question that we have in the chat before we give our insights and final reflections. And this can go to either of you. Marcy asks, how do you recommend addressing the issue for those who feel tokenized in the workplace? I say hire more than one of that type of person, because then there won't be tokenism. You should have a very diverse candidate slate when you are seeking people to join your organization. You should have a very diverse hiring panel when you are allowing people to interact with people who will potentially come into your organization. That's automatically going to interrupt that unconscious bias, because one person's bias on that hiring panel may not be another person's bias. And they'll be able to see that, hey, we just keep bringing in people that act and look like Cheryl. It's because Cheryl's biased. Of course, she wants people that work there and act like her. But if you have multiple people on that hiring panel, you start to make room for diversity, and you start to take away those unconscious biases. Charlotte and Cam, would you like to jump in here with some advice?
I mean, I think also we mentioned it on the last slide, surveying, getting the feedback too, asking the hard questions and not being afraid to ask them. The only way you're going to get better is by asking. It's something that it's one of our core values at Centerspace that we do, that I enjoy, is we ask on our town halls. We ask for the hard feedback. And I think that is one, could go a long way. If you're not, you just gotta take all in, good or bad. Are we doing this well? And listen to your workforce, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so I think that if anything, it's the feedback, candid, honest feedback.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Charlotte, did you want to jump in here? We also have another question that just popped into the chat.
Yeah, I think the feedback is important, but it's also being willing to address that with your teams that, yep, we got it wrong. And I think there's an expectation that we only highlight the good that we get, but here's what you said that wasn't great. And you're right, we did that wrong, or that's not what we intended and we're going to fix it, or being willing to just own up to, we're not going to get it right every time. Mm-hmm. But when we get that feedback, we're going to act on it.
Yep. Ownership and accountability is what I'm hearing from you, Charlotte. Thank you so much for sharing that. Our next question, our company does employee events, and if you participate, you get the rest of the day off. If you don't participate, you have to work all day. What are your thoughts? I don't like that.
That's definitely the stick versus the carrot. It's like, okay, so now I'm being punished because for all the reasons we've talked about, like there could be a host of other reasons other than, again, somehow they've been labeled as like not being a team player. So now here's your punishment. And that doesn't feel good to anyone.
Yeah, let's work on changing that practice today within that organization.
Yeah.
If they're not here, send this out to them when it gets recorded.
Yes.
Distributed, please, because you shouldn't be penalized just because you don't want to go hang out. Anything there, Cam? Or should we jump to the next?
Let's jump to the next one. That's good.
Okay, the next question. How do you combat the attitude that our surveys aren't actually anonymous, therefore they don't want to be honest? I've experienced this when running engagement surveys as well. People will hit me on the side and like, is this really anonymous? Charlotte, I know you have to have great insight as Chief People Officer on the anonymity of surveys.
So it's hard, right? Because again, we engage a third party specifically for our employee engagement feedback surveys, just because we genuinely then just get the data dump. There's no way, it doesn't come from our HRIS system. It doesn't come from anything we have access to. It's third party hosted. So in an attempt to help everyone feel more comfortable that this is truly anonymous, you're always going to have a handful that are like, yep, we still don't believe you, but we did our participation in the surveys in almost doubled when we actually have, the link comes from the third party All of the interaction, if they have questions, all of that goes through the third party. That doesn't even filter through BH. So it was helpful. We still have people that are like, yeah, right, we don't believe you. And that may always be the case.
You will always have that percentage of people who are not willing to take that survey. But also remind them, hey, if we don't know, we can't fix it. So regardless of the fact that you think the survey is anonymous, if you don't give us your feedback, how are we supposed to address any issues or make the organization better with your input? All right, so I want to get back to this slide before I toss it back over to James. We've reiterated that you need to survey your teams. Feedback is going to be a great way that you can value every voice in your organization and really start to make it inclusive. Create awareness by inviting your teams to DEI weeks. You can start there. This is a really easy thing to do. And then just make awareness inside of your organization that you want your practices to be inclusive. The more you say a thing out loud, the more people will raise their hand to say, hey, I have a problem with this, or I like to support in this way, and here's some feedback on that. And then, like Cam mentioned, be aware of resistance. When you see that tone, that mood, the physical change in someone, when you're maybe doing some of that corporate teasing or asking a question that's a little more invasive, take a moment, step back, reset, and apologize if you need to. And then, of course, there are tangible tools for you all. Myself, my panelists, we're available to support you in your DEI efforts. And then NAA, of course, has that DEI toolkit and a full committee of people who are committed to DE&I. So reach out to your network, reach out to your people, and really start to create inclusive spaces. James, with that, I'd like to pass it back over to you.
Great. Dana, Cameron, Charlotte, thank you all so much for a fantastic start to DE&I Awareness Week. Just want to remind everyone that we are just getting started. We've got 4 other sessions scheduled for this week that all cover a variety of topics, and we hope that we will see you back here at the same place using the same link tomorrow for our next session. With that, everyone have a fantastic Monday, and we will see you tomorrow.